This is Stephanie Vanderslice. My paper is called Revisiting the Challenge. Oh, I need to go back a little bit. Rethinking Creative Writing 10 Years On. I wrote Rethinking Creative Writing based on 10 years of research that I did into creative writing programs in higher education in the US and the UK. This was based on a lot of research I did reading about the programs, reading about creative writing studies as a whole, and also several study tours I took of programs in the UK. And also a lot of research that I did on programs in the US and some that I also visited. Based on what I learned from these programs up until 2010, I came up with two basic challenges. My first challenge was this. Based on my research, creative writing programs in this country, from the time that they were founded at Iowa in the 30s and 40s, there was possibly, we can chart the classroom founding before that, but in terms of MFA programs, they were founded by at the University of Iowa in the 30s and 40s, which started having classes in the subject, which had developed an MFA in the subject. They were all based on the idea that writers need to develop in an academic community, and just having this academic community would give them what they needed to develop as writers and to take their place in the next generation of the literary scene. What I wrote about and made the call for, the challenge for in Rethinking Creative Writing, is that this community was no longer enough by the late 20th century. Using the uncertainty of the arts career, the idea that we can't promise you anything, we can just give you time and community. So that using this uncertainty of the arts career as a smokescreen for programs that promise little more than a decentralized parochial signature pedagogy, the signature pedagogy being the workshop, was no longer viable. It was no longer viable for them to be using this as an excuse. Instead, my challenge was that creative writing programs needed to see themselves as accountable to their constituencies, their students, and to practice what my friend Mimi Thiebaud at the University of Bristol coined responsible creative writing teaching. What I was doing at the time, it'd be nice to say, well, I made the call and they listened. But that's not exactly what happened. What I was describing was a cultural moment in creative writing studies. I was surfing the crest of the first wave of the movement that had been begun by Wendy Bishop, Hans Ostrom, Kate Hake, and others. And then I was joining the voices of others such as Diane Donnelly, Anna Leahy, Graham Harper, Tim Myers, Jen Webb, and many others who are saying, this isn't enough. We really need to look at this, what it means to teach creative writing in higher education, what creative writing teaching in higher education should do. And so I was joining the voices of a lot of scholars and writers who were already looking at this. And I was happy to be doing that. So in a way, I was describing this cultural moment in rethinking creative writing. What was also happening at the same time were other critical circumstances. This was the publication in 2005 of Tom Keeley's The MFA in Creative Writing Handbook. The first edition came out in 2005, and then a revised edition in 2008, I believe. At the same time, in 2009, Seth Abramson's controversial rankings of creative writing programs began to appear in Poets and Writers magazine. Okay, so what first happened in Tom Keeley's book is that he wrote a book describing this is what an MFA in creative writing looks like. Here's some of the programs. Here's what a program should probably do for you. This is what you can get out of one, and this is what you should expect from one. And that is really critical. I tell all my students who are interested in an MFA, I would love to talk to you about this, and I would love to mentor you, but you have to read that book first. So we have Tom Keeley to thank for that book, kind of exploring what an MFA really is and should be. And then we have Seth Abramson's controversial rankings of creative writing programs starting in 2009. He ranked them based on funding, based on what the graduates ended up doing, also based on perceptions of students of these programs. A lot of people had serious problems with his rankings, I believe, because of how he did his statistics and the audience that he actually polled. But I actually think that this controversial rankings, which is no longer done, Poets and Writers just offers a huge database of these programs. But this ranking had the effect of finally shedding light on these programs and giving students answers to questions they had been asking for a long time and trying to find out. He was putting them all in one place in Poets and Writers and trying to show, this is what a good writing program might do. It might, it will have involved faculty. It may have courses that will help you when you graduate to get, started in publishing, or to know how to start in the publishing career, or to know how to publish itself, involve faculty, students who go on to do well after they graduate, cost of living, is, that kind of thing. He started to show all the information in this ranking that students were already looking for. These two circumstances, the book and the ranking, had the critical effect of nudging programs to be more transparent about what they provided. And in being more transparent about what they provided, it then had the effect of nudging programs to provide more. Another thing that happened at the same time is they both took to social media, which was rising at the time, to talk about these programs. Tom Keeley had the MFA blog, where students could talk about different programs and their experiences in them. For the first time on social media, students could talk to each other and share their experiences. Now we have the MFA draft, where every year students talk about programs in a Facebook page, about applying and all of that, and what are good programs, and what's the scoop, and what's everyone learning. These circumstances allow students to expect more and to be a lot more critical of their experience. They don't just walk into a program going, I don't know what I'm supposed to be getting here. I'm just hoping for the best. So those other critical circumstances had the effect of nudging programs to do better, along with the fact that we were looking very critically, and scholars were looking very critically at the programs themselves, and I was a part of that. So those two things did have an effect, and I will explain here. They did have an effect. I did an informal Facebook survey that noted that 36 asking programs since 2010. Has your creative writing program founded any new courses in publishing, literary publishing, editing, the life of the writer, how to develop as a writing, how to develop a writing career, those kinds of courses. And I asked this of the Creative Writing Pedagogy page on Facebook. So of course my audience was biased. My survey sample was biased, but still the fact that 36 programs reported at least one course that demonstrated their curricula was doing this kind of thing for their students, providing more courses in publishing about steps to success in writing. Some programs had minors and majors in this area. Most MFAs that were reporting said that they had these courses. This is a very informal survey, but the fact that there were 36 programs reporting this, whereas by 2010, I was struggling to find 10 of these programs, and many of them were in the UK. The fact that there are 36 programs reporting this does show that we have made some real inroads, and that programs are starting to do much better in this way in being responsible teachers of creative writing, curriculum builders, that these programs are starting to realize that they have no choice but to give better experiences to their students and more value for their education. Okay. Another thing I should also mention that was happening around 2010 is undergraduate college debt was skyrocketing. So students, and this is my experience as being an MFA director, students are no longer, just going on and saying, well, I don't have much debt from my undergrad, so I'll just take on more debt for grad school. No, they want fully funded programs. And if they have to pay anything at all, it better be a really good value for that money. So they're much more critical. That is another factor here. So these programs over the last 10 years have realized this and have started, adding these courses to their curriculum. So that was one of the main things that I had called for. And it's really exciting to see that it's happening. However, I also asked in that book, who are we listening to? My second challenge in Rethinking Creative Writing was, who are we listening to? And whose voices are not being heard? Who are we just recreating ourselves in the writing landscape, in the literary arts landscape, and making it possible that people just like us who've had all of our advantages, and I'm citing someone as relatively privileged, although I am a woman, part of that minority. Otherwise, I do have a lot of privileges. Are we just reproducing ourselves and not really making sure that in creative writing, the writing world, the writing landscape reflects the actual world we live in the sense that it includes people, includes BIPOC, it includes people with disabilities. I mean, it's as inclusive as possible, because we're all part of the same world, and the writing and the art that represents this world should reflect it. So I made that challenge in the book as well. How are we doing on that? That was actually that was a challenge that I think was probably overlooked somewhat, which is not to say that there hasn't been a lot done about it in the last 10 years, but to say that we're really just starting to figure these things out. But that was my second challenge. So what are we doing about inclusion and diversity? Whose voices are we listening? Whose voices are not being heard? Are we widening our reach, or are we just reproducing ourselves? We need to historicize, contextualize, and deprovincialize the workshop. This is something that comes from an article in Poets and Writers, the MFA edition, which comes out every year this time. And I think we can actually thank Seth Abramson and his MFA rankings for really making sure that 10 years later, those MFA editions are really substantive. This year, they really focused on that diversity and inclusion. And I would say really for the first time, because the literary arts has a diversity problem. I think we can admit that. It's been written about for years by lots of scholars, writers and scholars such as Junot Diaz, David Mura, Joy Castro, Matthew Salises. The list goes on, Claudia Rankine. Okay, the list goes on. People who have absolutely pointed out that we need to be doing better and be including all students in these programs. And that is the only way that we will be able to change the landscape of the literary arts in this country and make it more reflective. This section in Poets and Writers was extremely in-depth. and really did a great job of showcasing what's been going on in the last, I would say, 5 years in this area. So there is some work happening, but I would say for the second challenge, a lot more needs to be happening, that we're really just getting started. As Claudia Rankine said in her keynote address in the 2016 AWP conference, we have to admit that this work needs to be done and we need to do it. But that's the first step, is saying there is work that needs to be done. It is work and it needs to be done. Some of what if you look at some statistics on publishing, in the literary landscape and publishing, you will notice that there's been a lot written about the problem of representation in publishing for the last 5 years, but there hasn't been a lot of change. You know, they started talking about, people started talking about this as an issue 5 years ago. An article in The Guardian that was also repeated in Publishers Weekly said that there really hasn't been much change. And that is a call that I am continuing to make, and that I think we all need to continue to make, to change the MFA, as the authors in the MFA section really noted. I really, really encourage you to take a look at that issue. Actually, hold on, I'm going to pause. Okay, this is the issue. Poets and Writers, MFA in Flux, a call for systemic change programs, considering the online MFA, what if your program closes, so on and so forth. There are two critical articles. One is Namrata Padar's Return to the MFA. If you want to get the scoop on really kind of a quick guide to what's been written about issues with the MFA and creative writing programs in higher education and their problems with diversity, this is the article you need to first read. It will refer you to a ton of other works that you probably then want to avail yourselves of, but it's a very good start if you really don't know what's going on in this field. Once you've done that, We Need New Metaphors by Rachel Cruz goes on to discuss all the different ways that you can reimagine power in the creative writing workshop. And it is probably, again, if you are going to only go to one piece to get started in answering this call, okay, to historicize, contextualize, and deprovincialize the workshop and creative writing, this is the article you want to start with. It tells you what the issues are, and it also tells you how to solve them. It tells you, how to start thinking about your creative writing classroom in different ways. So absolutely, I really encourage you to look at those two articles in answering that call, okay? Because what I would say is we've done pretty well in making the creative writing workshop more responsive to its constituents, as I asked for in Rethinking Creative Writing, as many scholars called for in the late aughts and earlier than that, and as Tom Keeley and Seth Abramson and a lot of very discriminating students helped to bring about. But we have done a good job of that. We can't stop. We need to keep doing it. But our second responsibility is to make these programs more inclusive and more diverse. There's actually a great quote I'm going to finish with from the Padar article. And I really, if you haven't read these articles, go out and read them as soon as you can. I can't recommend them highly enough. Although change requires all of us to actively do our part in learning, unlearning, and addressing our own blind spots, in taking action every day within our sphere of influence, key questions at the heart of systemic change are those of power. Who holds power in major leadership or gatekeeping positions in writing programs? Would they be willing to share this power in a fair, not tokenist way? And if they've held it for too long, would they consider relinquishing it or redistributing it in an effective way? As for the traditional MFA, any revised pedagogical focus on BIPOC or diverse points of view will falter yet again if the institution refuses to confront its racial pandemic, a long-standing history of whiteness masquerading as the essence of art, transcendence, humanity, universality, or the most of American of ideals, freedom. It's our responsibility to confront this issue. And nothing showed us that more than the issues in the Black Lives Matter movement that came to a head this past summer. We are responsible in our discipline for waking up and making the same changes. And in doing so, there's a lot you can read. You can look at the website dcanon.org. That's one where I often start. There's a lot of good books out there, but the best place to start is those. If you're really just starting, is looking at those two books and Poets and Writers. And if we can do both those things, if we can make our programs more responsive to all students and make them more inclusive, I think we've taken some huge steps in making writing programs more salient to the 21st century.